1 of this series, we showed that climate change is already in extremely dangerous nonlinear exponential mode, demonstrated by a temperature increase of half a degree centigrade over the 3 decades ending in 2011, and clearly showing the accelerating shift in the decadal standard distribution of Northern Hemisphere summer temperatures. We plotted this shift on a graph that shows that we are hurtling out of the temperature range of the Holocene into the unknown. That temperature range is essential for the stability of the Earth's organic carbon stores, and moving out of it is leading to massive releases of greenhouse gases, which are the accelerator of the exponential curve. One of the interrelated consequences is likely to be a progressive breakdown in the world's food supply chain, which will have simply catastrophic consequences for civilization as we continue to attempt to feed 7.2 billion people. So in part 2, we review the predictable response of the world's official bodies, who are currently attempting to commit to avoiding an overall increase of 2 degrees centigrade, a proposition that will allow the planet to more than double the current amount of warming, and which would take us way off the scale up that exponential curve. This is how the fate of the world will be decided in the absence of independent intervention. The next UNFCCC meeting will be in Paris, December 2015. 194 nations plus the EU will meet to negotiate an agreement to be implemented in 2020 to avoid a 2 degrees centigrade increase above the pre-industrial benchmark, focused solely on emissions reductions. How any such agreement could be enforced is a complete mystery, and due entirely to the endless delays of essential remediation, emissions reductions will now not come close to stabilizing the climate. There is a reason. Even if we start to reduce emissions at a dramatic rate, the overall level of CO2 in the atmosphere is going to continue to rise, as it is impossible to go directly to 100% reduction. The savings, at best, approximately 50% at the end of what was emitted during the transition. And let us be perfectly pragmatic. We do not have the tools at this time to even achieve net zero. At best, we will add a further 40 parts per million of CO2 to the atmosphere, and at worst, 80 parts per million or more. It all depends on the sense of urgency, international commitment, and vested interests retreating, and the unknown component of just how fast the organic carbon stores convert to greenhouse gases. Risks we simply cannot afford to take. One might add that any emissions reduction program will evolve on an S-curve, not a straight line, because that's how it works in the real world. Added to the above is the reality that there is a considerable amount of lag in the pipeline due to slower feedbacks, which will be more than enough to drive us through Six Sigma in terms of extreme summer temperature events. And as all of the feedbacks interreact, tree mortality and phytoplankton reduction is accelerating right across the planet, thereby reducing critical natural sinks and by default adding more CO2 to the atmosphere and oceans. Is it any wonder that Hansen published a paper in 2013, co-authored by 17 other leading climate scientists, which stated that we must stay as close as possible to the temperatures we have experienced in the Holocene? The only way to accomplish this is to deploy a fully integrated plan on a massive scale to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and oceans. The alternative is unthinkable. Emissions reductions alone will now be utterly insufficient to avoid catastrophe. Looking back at more than 20 years of perpetually gridlocked international negotiations, is it unreasonable to anticipate that we will get anything better than a subpar agreement at the Paris talks? True to form, early indications from the EU and the US speak of low-end proposals and the most likely outcome, a course that commits us to exceed 2 degrees centigrade. Thus, we are all going to be exposed to the horrors that a 2 degrees centigrade or more of warming will cause. None of the information we revealed in Part 1 will be considered, due to UNFCCC protocols. In fact, returning to our due diligence approach, We have a detailed report that shows some of the information concerning the Arctic, a critical component of the climate that delegates will review, is over 9 years old. Further, that other identifiable risks will not even be considered, as the data has not met the timeline protocols or is not included in the IPCC assessments, the sole reference document upon which all deliberations will be made. No military, business, particularly the financial sector, or parent would assess risk on out-of-date information or incomplete data. All would want the latest information available. All of it, especially where it concerns possible risk. In fact, they would demand it. Irrespective of the identifiable risks associated with the following components of the climate. 1. The exponential decline of the volume of the Arctic sea ice and all it entails, from changing weather patterns to potentially catastrophic Arctic methane venting, will not be considered. 2. The observed changes in the jet stream, impacting weather patterns that are critical for mass agriculture and additionally causing mega floods and droughts, will not be considered. 3. The imminence of a world food crisis triggered by the rapid changes we have discussed will not be considered. 4. The projections for sea level rise will be understated, as the latest research on Greenland and Antarctica will not be considered. So in our assessment, the evidence is overwhelming. The risk is simply not being properly assessed or managed by the very body the world is relying on to do just that. Because there is a near certainty that progressively accelerating climate change will be totally unsuitable for our civilization, as all sense of seasonal stability is lost, crops fail at ever-increasing rates, mega droughts and colossal flooding occur, and we move into a process of continual retreat from rising sea levels. Unless we collectively face up to the reality of our predicament, there is a very real danger that we will trigger a cascade event throughout the matrix that defines civilization, as the carrying capacity of the planet continually declines due to crop and water supply failures. The inevitable result, as predicted by military bodies, will be resource wars. At a time when the world will need to act in harmony, the exact opposite will be progressively evolving, setting the stage for a collapse of modern civilization and an inability to address the root cause. And why are we doing this? To protect, at all cost, the fossil fuel-based paradigm. Well, once one moves beyond wishful thinking and faces the reality, at all cost, is precisely the risk we are taking. All cost will be the end of civilization. It is ironic that, if this threat was reframed in terms of terrorism, legislation would be flying through all governments and trillions of dollars would be made available. But attacking terrorism is not the same as tackling the hydrocarbon economy. There is a choice. We can rely on official bodies to provide a solution. Or, after a thorough evaluation, we can reject that course as being overladen with unidentified and unacknowledged risk, and choose to become masters of our own destiny, and turn the current direction from a negative to a positive outcome. The Unity Group has drawn up a fully integrated plan to start that process, which has absolutely no reliance on government action, or inaction, believing that the process of government is so unwieldy and so closely wedded to the hydrocarbon economy as to be incapable of reacting in the necessary time frame. This plan will be presented in Part 3, and the Unity Group is keen to enter into immediate discussions with organisations that have assimilated the risks described here. So let's talk and get this job done before events overwhelm us.